I'll speak English. Apologies to the translators. I've just completely rewritten my speech, so I might start doing weird patterns. But it's so wonderful to be here for many reasons. My parents live here, so this is almost like coming home. But most importantly, I spend my life really between two war zones. I live in Washington, where we're in the middle of some call it a cold civil war, definitely an informational civil war. One certainly can't refer to what's going on in America as any kind of normal democratic debate. This is not about different ideas being discussed in the public sphere. You have one side who is approaching the information space as a war zone. Their aim is to destroy institutions, wipe out intellectual cadres, and to take over the machinery of the state. Yeah, they're not trying to win a debate. They're trying to take over a country. And then I'm on my way to Ukraine, where there is a physical war going on. My life is between Washington and Kyiv. And of course, there the war is real, but for those of us who've been working on Ukraine for a long time, we know that it was prepared for over a decade with information operations, seeding distrust, seeding division, buying up politicians, and again, also thinking about the information space not as a public sphere where we can debate different ideas, but as a series of tactics and tools to destroy a country or to prepare it for a full-scale invasion. So I'm traveling from one war zone to another where information plays this critical role, where disinformation plays a role. And it's lovely to pause here in Prague in a place of peace for the moment. Yeah? When we look at the future of Europe, we're in the last days of the last glimmers of warm sunshine that started in Prague in 1989. Yeah, we're at the dying embers of liberal democracy as we've known it. The pressure from Russia is increasing. It's not just these old things that we've talked about for a long time. It's not just about, social media trolls and bots. That's from 5 years ago. Right now, Russia is launching non-stop cyber attacks in Poland and Germany aimed at critical infrastructure. They are recruiting, often Ukrainian refugees in order to commit arson, to set fire to buildings, to set fire to the largest shopping mall in Warsaw, to try to assassinate the head of Germany's largest arms manufacturer. And these are information operations as well, even though these are kinetic attacks on the cybersecurity and on the security of Europe, these are always thought through in an informational way as well. I mean, the reason the Russians will recruit Ukrainian refugees to commit crimes, it is to make Ukrainians look bad in Europe and to stoke anti-immigrant feelings, which will then be pushed further online by supporting far-right parties and so on. So they're thinking about all these operations as one. They're advancing and advancing. And at the same time, as the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz says, he feels that America, using its vast tools of algorithmic power, tried to influence the German election. In this case, Elon Musk, using his algorithm, a completely non-transparent tool, to empower the far right. So Europe is facing a threat from two sides, and then from inside as well, of course, the rise of authoritarian populism. And I'm not talking about left or right wing. I'm not even talking about debates about immigration. That's all a completely legitimate part of politics. Yeah? What we're talking about in my area of expertise specifically, thank you for the tea, that's the Englishman in me. Like, as I talk about the end of the West, I want a cup of tea. I'm talking about the growth of a type of, let's use the word propaganda, but a type of discourse that makes democracy impossible. Yeah? The abuse of the information space, not just to win an election, but to actually make democratic practice impossible. I'm talking about, I don't know, the use of certain types of speech, like conspiracy theories, after which you really can't have a rational debate. And if you ever try to debate a conspiracy theorist, you know what I mean. Or we're talking about, you know, developing forms of identity which are so toxic, which dehumanize others to such an extent that we can no longer coexist as a community because we see other people as less than human. We're talking about spreading so much disinformation, which is only a tiny bit of the problem. I do worry we think disinformation the problem. That's not the problem. The problem is a certain type of political actor. But it's so much disinformation that the environment gets so confused we can't function anymore. That's the threat, yeah? And we've already seen it kind of hit and tip over into a non-democratic politics in Hungary and almost in Poland. We have to admit that those of us who dreamt of a democratic sphere where we would all debate one another based on a degree of empathy with our opponents, yeah? Based on a common idea of evidence, based on telling stories to understand each other and advance society and come to decisions, this whole fantasy of a democratic public sphere, which is actually the essence of democracy, the agora of the ancient Greek world, we have to admit, those of us who dreamt of that, we've lost. It's gone. Yeah? And the question right now is, can those of us who claim to defend democracy, those of us who claim to be inheritors of the spirit of the Velvet Revolution in 1989, whoever's left, the question now purely is, can we compete and can we win? We have to admit that all the tools that we've had so far have failed. Yeah? Noble ideas like fact-checking are noble, beautiful, and in some way even spiritual, I'd say, but they have no chance against a propaganda that is boosting a sense of superiority and inferiority of others. The idea of, you know, a marketplace of ideas, this wonderful notion that people are rational beings, and as long as you give them lots of different information, they'll choose the highest quality. Yeah? A theory based on rational choice, which we've kind of discarded in economics and sociology, but journalists still have, the last people who hold on to this idea, has turned out to be a completely false philosophy. The idea of pluralism, you know, there'll be different newspapers and that'll contribute to a debate, that's gone. Pluralism has devolved into forms of polarization so vicious that we can't have a democratic debate. So the question now is, when the other side is using tactics and thinking about this in purely militarized terms, revolutionary terms, how do we respond? This is an old debate, actually. Can those who claim to be defenders of democracy fight effectively? And should they fight in a way that is a little bit dirty? So in my last book, which hasn't come out yet here, but it will, it's being translated, I go back to the Second World War. I look at how the British created an armada of underground radio stations, yeah, in order to subvert the Nazis. They were a huge scandal in the British government. They used pornography, yeah? Incredible, vivid scenes of orgies between Nazi officials and sailors and ladies of the night. They used non-stop swear words. They used really this fountain of vitriol, viciousness, and sex. There were people in the British government who were appalled, you know. How can we use pornography in order to defend our great and enlightened cause? And the people who worked in it said, this is what works. This is how we get to audiences that are being seduced by Nazi propaganda. This is how we get soldiers to defect. This works. And it works because it understands human psychology and the power of Nazi propaganda. It understands that it taps into all these very, very strong, often deeply sexual and angry desires, and it's rechanneling them back against the Nazis. You can read all the other tricks that were pulled by the British when the book comes out here, but the debate that they were having, how dirty should democratic forces go to be effective, is one that we have to start thinking about now. Now, I'm not talking about pornography. I love the idea of using pornography for democracy, but we can have that as a group chat later. But as I try to think of the steps and the tactics and the tools that will be effective to fight with the enemies of democracy, but will still be true to our values, I started to kind of sketch out what an architecture of this might look like. And I see this as an open discussion, because frankly, we do not know. We have some lessons from history, we have some academic experiments, we have some lessons from Ukraine, from Estonia, from Taiwan, the places where this is existential and where we need to learn from. But really, we're at the start of this journey. But let's start with the things that we can get to very fast. Yeah? When I hear talk of disinformation and all these issues, the first question that comes up as a game changer, allegedly, is the legal question. Yeah? What is the role of regulation? Yeah? And as we know, there is a huge charge from America saying that any attempt to police speech is censorship. J.D. Vance came to Munich, as I'm sure you all know, and gave a lecture to the Europeans that you have betrayed the ideals of 1989 and are now practicing censorship by having laws around hate speech, by arresting people for what they say online, by calling off the election in Romania due to some unspecified Russian disinformation operation on TikTok. The accusation was, you guys are betraying your democratic traditions. I testified recently to the European Parliament on this topic, and these aren't just American ideas. These ideas are being echoed. Yeah? The idea that there is an attack on democracy in Europe through censorship are being echoed by many parts of the political spectrum, frankly, also by human rights groups. And here's the really annoying thing, they have a point. Yeah? There has been no appearance of any kind of new speech that needs regulating. Yeah? We already have laws around, I don't know, child pornography. We already have laws that will stop, I don't know, let's say somebody sends you a message confusing you about where to vote. We have laws stopping that. That's already illegal. You don't need any new laws for these forms of disinformation. Yeah? There is no new type of speech that has appeared. The attempt to categorize as legal or illegal political speech, which hasn't been barred already in the past, is weird if you think about it. Yeah? Nothing new is being said that hasn't been said since the laws were put in place largely after 1945. My sense is we've completely misunderstood the challenge. The challenge is not any kind of new type of speech. Lies always existed. Disinformation always existed. What is new is the technology. What is new is the ability to scale it, to target it. What is new are algorithms which essentially organize everything you see, organize your reaction, put one thing top and another thing bottom, and you don't know why. That's the accusation Merz is kind of making at Musk. He's saying, suddenly on your platform, the AfD, the far-right German party, went whoosh right to the top. What happened? Did you change something? Did you tweak something? We don't know. In Romania, it's the same problem. There was a mysterious campaign on the mysterious platform TikTok with its very, very opaque ties to the Chinese Communist Party that suddenly pushed a far-right candidate from nowhere top of its algorithm. How? What happened? It's all in the dark. If we were to use this metaphor of a public sphere, a public square, at the moment, due to the nature of the technology we live in, it's one full of a noxious fog, a black mist through which we can't see anything. We do not understand how our environment is shaped. So the regulation, I think, has to be about that. A radical transparency. I, as a citizen, should understand. I should have the right to understand. Actually, it's part of my freedom of speech to understand. Freedom of speech is about the right to receive information, not just speak. I should understand whether something I see online is a Russian operation or just some pissed off people in Ostrava. I should understand why Elon Musk has suddenly put the AfD top. Was it natural? What did he do? Is he a political actor? If he's a political actor, there are laws around that. I should understand why the far-right candidates in Romania suddenly came top. Who was behind that? I should understand which of my own data is being used and then weaponized against me. I should understand if I see a political ad, is my neighbor seeing the same one or a completely different one because he's been profiled in a different way. Until we have that transparency, we cannot have any public sphere. If anything, the censorship that we face is one around not understanding how our information environment is formed. Now, this sort of regulation, and bits of this, by the way, are in the Digital Service Act that the EU has put forward. They're not very well explained, but they are there. If that is what we focus on, that's completely in line with democratic values. That's a demand for more information, not for censorship. That totally undermines the arguments of the advances. And actually, we can say, America, you're the ones with the problem with censorship. You're the ones with a problem with a transparency deficit. But all such regulation would do would give a vision. We would be able to see our public sphere for the first time, since at least 11 years. We'd be able to understand what the hell is going on. But that's all regulation can do. All that regulation can do is create a condition where we, the forces who think they're defending democracy, have a chance. At the moment, we have no chance. So that's the first step. The second step, how long am I meant to talk for? How much do I have? 3 minutes? Okay, so I've got 9 more minutes left, yeah? Okay, good. I'm good, fine. I was just worried that there was 20 minutes. Okay. So let's focus. Only got 9 minutes left. So that's the first step. We can use very tough regulation, very, very tough, without getting into questions of censorship, avoiding the impossible debate about what is disinformation. Disinformation is not a legal term. The minute you start talking about it as a legal category, the people who freak out the most are the human rights groups, the free speech groups. I've sat in many of these meetings. So that's where regulation goes. But you've got to understand that's a game changer. Because the Russians and the Chinese, and sadly for the moment the American oligarchs, they will never allow this to happen. They don't want people to understand how they are manipulating the information environment. That would make Europe the beacon of liberty that America is relinquishing. But that just creates a space that we can compete in. The fact is we have to compete. What does that mean? There's at least two pieces to this. One of them is to do with technology itself. Yeah? How do you design technological spaces that are conducive towards democratic discourse? Yeah? Again, there's so much we can learn from places like Taiwan, because for them it's existential. Yeah? So in Taiwan, there are several projects led by their amazing Minister for Digital, Audrey Tang, which kind of create the anti-Facebook and the anti-X. Social media platforms that are designed not to create a mob-like mentality, that don't reward extremism, that don't highlight hate, but which are transparent, and which, for example, one of them called vTaiwan, which finds the commonalities and arguments so that you can resolve political and policy debates. So not sharpening the contradictions, but finding the commonalities. That's just one example. It doesn't work for everything. It can work for some things. But I think the key point here is to make citizens, or to enable citizens, to help own and control and set the rules for the algorithm. On Reddit, which is a platform that's been used for many things in America, but there's lots of research by social scientists showing that in environments where the group on the platform decide together how to make the rules. Yeah, they decide together what should be ranked up or down, what counts as evidence and what isn't. What is the order of people answering? What the rules are. When they get together and decide the rules, the quality of the conversation becomes much better. There is something about citizens getting involved in the process of setting the rules for the technology that makes it much more productive. Yeah? And that kind of gets me to the next point. Technology is one thing. Regulation is one thing. The third one is content production, media production. For the last 8 years, I've been involved with largely journalists from Ukraine, where we have been experimenting nonstop with ways to subvert what Russia was doing in Ukraine. Yeah? Some of the work was very tactical, some of the work was much deeper. For example, we looked at why are Kremlin conspiracies popular. They weren't just popular in the east of the country. Yeah? They were popular in the west of the country. Yeah? We were looking at the high popularity of conspiracy theories saying that the little orphans of Soros, the Sorosiata, were secretly controlling the government, or that the only reason the IMF was helping Ukraine was to then steal its land. All this sort of anti-Western conspiracies, incredibly popular in the most patriotic bits of Ukraine. Yeah? And when we did focus groups, when we did a huge amount of research trying to understand why, people aren't stupid. They were like, this is Russian propaganda, we're not quite sure, it feels weird, but it speaks to an emotional truth. All our lives we've been cheated. Historically, we've been abused, cheated, robbed. In the 1990s, banks like the IMF came to us, took our money and ran away. The IMF will do the same. This sense of deep disempowerment, of a deep lack of a sense of agency, was the ground on which the conspiracy theorists flourished. So the response had nothing to do with fact-checking or telling people they were wrong about the IMF and explaining that the little orphans of Soros were really quite incompetent and impotent. You had to work on those feelings, on that deep feeling of a lack of agency. How do you do that? The way journalism usually works, we just provide information. That will not help. You can provide them all the information you want, the Russians will keep on winning, as they are everywhere in Europe, as their allies are everywhere in Europe. We think this is about information and fact-checking. They know It's about emotion, identity, and trauma. Yeah? Think of this as the competition not between information and disinformation, but between the cult leader and the therapist. Both understand people's traumas. The cult leader will then take them, manipulate them, and make those people their slave, while the therapist will try to get people to talk about them and ultimately to empower them. Media don't usually think in these terms. We have to start if we want to compete. So that might mean a shift from simply providing information to providing the sort of information that is socially useful for people. Start becoming the help for people in order to empower them. Go deeper and start working through the deeper traumas. When we made programs about history in Ukraine, we first did a lot of interviews with people. Yeah? What are the parts of your history that you feel are not discussed, are not talked about? And all this stuff started coming out about the Afghan war, how somebody in their family had fought in Afghanistan, about Chernobyl and how they felt abused by Chernobyl. So we started making documentaries about how the regime in Moscow had been responsible for that pain, and that pain, and that pain. Not abstract things, but specific pains they remembered. Raising those issues and saying, look, that's the guilty party over there. Which was true. Then the war started, and we had to focus more on military supply chains and more practical things. But as I've been thinking, as I've been thinking about very concrete things the last 2 years, like many of us have, I'm sure many of you have been thinking about how to deliver drones to the front in Ukraine, how to sort of boycott Western companies so they don't deliver, spare parts to Russia to build missiles. I've had to learn to really think about the enemy's supply chains in a strategic way. This is the third point that I want to get to. Point 1 is regulation. Point 2 is technology. Point 3 is a new kind of media. Point 4 is thinking about the enemy's system in a strategic way. So when you think about military supply chains, you don't just choose any little bit of technology that you want to stop getting to Russia. A lot of people obsess on microchips. Let's stop microchips getting to Russia. An impossible and counterproductive task. Microchips, apart from very elite ones, are everywhere. They're in washing machines. You won't stop them. Yeah? So we spend a lot of time working with journalists, with researchers, with government, going, actually, it's that technology over here that we need to stop. Because that's the technology that creates the machines that build the machines. That's where you get them. And that's where they're vulnerable. They depend on this company. This company has an office here. It has a second office here. We can put pressure on them there. Now, why am I doing this weird aside on military supply chains? We have to start thinking about the enemy's disinformation supply chains, media supply chains, influence supply chains, assassination supply chains. So we have to stop just chasing around every bit of disinformation. That's like chasing around every microchip. You start thinking, where is the funding coming from? How do we start damaging it? What is the technology that they're using? How do we start subverting it? Who are their proxies that they're working this through? How do we make their life so difficult that they stop? Then we can focus our efforts. Through the classic means that we always do, through investigative journalism, through advocacy, through all the things that we actually know how to do, but that we have not applied systemically to the enemy at all. I was going to go back to porn in a clever way, but I'm not going to. I'm going to pause there, and hopefully we can have a fruitful discussion. But those 4 points, yeah? Regulation that makes the public sphere transparent. Technology that enables democratic discourse. A media that understands, competes with, and beats the adversary at reaching audiences. And an approach to systemically dismantling their disinformation machine is the start of how we fight back with democratic values. None of these things in any way contradict the ideals of democracy, but every one of them is targeted, and every one of them is calculated towards an effect. Thank you.